Hello and welcome to this discussion on the Islamic State, its origins, the nature of the threat it poses, and of course the fact that it has not yet managed to penetrate India. Joining me to discuss ISIS is Ambassador Tamiz Ahmed. Let's separate out our discussion into the security dimension, the geopolitical dimension, and the theological dimension, and try to pick through these subjects one by one, although of course there are connections. And let's start with the security dimension of the threat that ISIS poses. It used to be said that what marked ISIS apart from Al-Qaeda, which was the most deadly terrorist organization that the West was confronting or the region was confronting prior to the rise of ISIS, was that ISIS had managed to control territory and actually held physical space that they were then using to build some kind of a caliphate, as they defined it. Today, however, it's obvious that even though that space or territory of theirs has come under threat or come under pressure from not just Iraq or Syria, but also Western bombing, Russian bombing, ISIS has begun to pose a deterritorial or extraterritorial threat to countries all over the world. We've seen attacks in Dhaka, we've seen attacks in Nice, in Germany, where people are claiming allegiance to ISIS. ISIS is owning up to these attacks. So, to what extent do you believe ISIS is responsible for the 5 or 6 attacks that we've seen all over the world? Are they simply boasting or making a claim? Are there actually connections? And what does this tell us about the kind of security threat that ISIS poses?
Yes. ISIS represents the third stage of global jihad. The first stage began with the global jihad in Afghanistan, culminating with the setting up of the first caliphate in the shape of the Emirate of Afghanistan under Taliban, and ending with the events of 9/11. The second stage.
So you say from roughly 1979 up to 9/11.
1980, when the global jihad was put together. This was the first stage. The second stage was when the Emirate was destroyed. It did not cease to, Al-Qaeda did not cease to exist. It deterritorialized. And it remained a lethal presence for the next 10 years. Separately, you see the emergence of the Islamic State in Iraq. I call it the third stage because in 2011, when this stage begins, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi became the leader of the Islamic State of Iraq. It is true that he has taken advantage of the political situation at home in Iraq, the sectarian divide, the extremely foolish and narrow policies of Nouri Maliki, and his dependence on the Shia militia rather than the building up of a national army. He was able to put together a very powerful force of disgruntled Sunni elements, diverse Sunni elements in Iraq. These included jihadis, Saddam loyalists.
So remnants of the old Ba'athists.
Yes, remnants of the old armed forces and security forces. Also from the Naqshbandiya Sufi community led by Izzat Ibrahim, and tribal chiefs who were deeply dissatisfied with the empowerment of the Shia, which was the basis for the American political order in Iraq from 2003 onwards. So they spread themselves very slowly and clandestinely, and then taking advantage of the emasculation of the Iraqi army, they were able to very, very dramatically capture Mosul. And from Mosul then they spread across and have today become a proto-state. So this is the second jihadi state after the Emirate of Afghanistan. They are under tremendous pressure, obviously, but it is important to recall how ISIS works. There is a core ISIS, very similar to Al-Qaeda. There is a core ISIS which scholars have referred to as the proto-state based in Raqqa and Mosul. This is the core ISIS. It has a top leadership. It has people who are the basis for their theological thinking. Also the military strategists. These are the people who are the top economists and financiers, and those who manage information. These are the top leadership of the Islamic State. And then of course you have provincial leaders and the rank and file, and then of course you have at the bottom of the rung the suicide bombers. This is the first lot. The second lot are those who are affiliates. These are decentralized. These are decentralized entities in different parts of the region. For example, in Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan has splintered, and certain elements have announced their allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Similarly, the Afghan Taliban have done so. Al-Shabaab in Somalia has done so, as has Boko Haram. So you have
Sections of the Taliban. Afghan
Afghan
Taliban.
sections.
Yeah.
So in this way, even if for the sake of argument, it were to be obliterated in Mosul and Raqqa, it has spread its tentacles right across West Asia, South and West Asia, from Pakistan to the Mediterranean and Saharan and Sub-Saharan Africa. A very tremendously robust space. But there is something, the third thing which has happened, which is its unique contribution to jihad operations, and this is the proliferation of lone wolves or lone warrior attacks. Because most of its activity, its message has gone across social media. I called the Islamic State the third stage or the third generation of jihad. Its membership is much younger, its leadership is much younger, it appeals to its people through social media of the most sophisticated type in the world. Therefore, without
Now we saw, if I stop you for a second, we saw Al-Qaeda also
Yeah.
use graphic, horrible videos of
Yes.
their so-called execution
Yes,
videos,
yes.
some amount of use of the internet, but
Yes.
ISIS has taken it to a new
No,
level.
yeah, they have taken it to a new level. Al Qaeda cannot match this. Their efforts were at best extremely crude and carried very little conviction. The kind of videos and messages that they are putting across today through social media, taking advantage of frontier technology in this regard, and some of the most talented people in the business, their messages appeal to different kinds of people. The message to the underclass in the United States is quite different from those to the underclass in France. Messages for women are uniquely addressing women. Those that go to the Arab world are different, and those that go to South Asia are different. They're extremely slick, extremely attractive. This is what most of us have today to be concerned about. That the appeal to a lone wolf or lone warrior, isolated in some corner, for reasons which are not yet comprehensible by you and me, they at some stage are attracted to violence, to jihadi violence, and then perpetrate extraordinary terror in
And
different
tell me,
places.
the place of the lone wolf.
Yes.
Does it require? I mean, these are obviously self-motivated, self-radicalized
Yes.
people. At some stage, do they form a connection or a link with ISIS, or do they simply absorb these messages and go about it? And ISIS perhaps may
We
not even
don't
know.
know because all of this is happening very, very rapidly.
Right.
Do recall that ISIS entered our consciousness only 2 years ago.
Right.
It may have proclaimed itself in 2011, but it really became a recognizable entity only in 2014 when Mosul fell. So it's really about 2 years have passed since all of this has happened. We are struggling to understand, all of us are struggling to understand their appeal, their methodology, why certain people are susceptible to their message and certain others are not. My own feeling is that the lone warrior may not in fact have any link whatsoever with the headquarters at Raqqa or Mosul. It is just the message from the social media so well prepared as to appeal to certain people. Now, the interesting issue for all of us who are analyzing these new developments is to attempt to understand what is it that reaches certain people and does not reach others. For example, I can understand based on what we have seen in the French writings that there is a huge underclass in France, third generation, very poorly educated, isolated culturally and economically and educationally. They either have the option of going into crime or going in for jihad. And some of those are attracted on this basis. In the case of UK, the struggle is even greater because these are second or third generation middle class and above middle class people, perhaps from Bangladeshi or Pakistani origin, never showed in the past any interest in Islam.
And actually quite well integrated.
Very
in their
well
societies.
integrated
Yeah.
in society. And then we are told that under the influence of some charismatic, alim, they were made jihadis. And then I want to ask the question, this begs the question, why they? Why, what was it that appealed to them so specially that they not only blew themselves up, but killed a very large number of people in July 2005? Then you have the message pertaining to the GCC countries. GCC countries is a little better to understand, but sometimes can be very confusing. These are young people with everything going for them. They have extremely affluent
And we're seeing foot
background.
soldiers from there too. Huh?
Yes, they're a very large number, extremely large number, I'm sorry to say. Several thousand have gone from
So
GCC.
there the deprivation or
It
marginalization
doesn't
argument
apply.
doesn't apply.
Doesn't apply.
Exactly.
They come from cohesive families, they have the best of education, they have a benign welfare-based society. Why is it that? So it is said that some sections of the GCC community, perhaps because they read certain kind of literature in their schools and colleges, or meet certain kinds of people, or there is a certain cultural emptiness. I'm just guessing. I'm just studying the subject along with all of you, all
That
of
they
us.
will be predisposed
Yeah.
towards accepting this. kind of-
Possibly some of them.
Right.
You know that in the case of Afghanistan, there was actual state encouragement
Yeah.
to go for jihad. And this is the next generation after that, possibly two generations after that. It is simplistic to say that they are motivated by their education system, because the education system has been thoroughly reformed after the events of 9/11. So it's not easy to explain. In the case of Pakistan, there is a pervasive, sense of jihad. Jihad has become integral to the Pakistani polity, and therefore they have local home-based institutions that have encouraged people to go in for jihad outside the state apparatus, though we know that there is some degree of state influence as well upon them. Bangladesh has completely foxed me. I know that these boys did not have any direct link with the Islamic State. I am now told that possibly they had some link with the Bangladesh radical organization Jamaat al-Mujahideen Bangladesh, JMB, some of whose leaders have been arrested recently. They are said to be an affiliate. They are said to be a jihadi affiliate. Now, are they a jihadi affiliate? When did they announce this affiliation? What is the level of their connectivity? I know about Al-Shabaab, and I know about Boko Haram, and I know about various other entities, Al-Muhajirun, etc. But where is did we have the basic literature with regard to JMB announcing this? Then this photograph that has appeared is very curious, because it's fake. It was taken in Bangladesh. This is just the flag in the background.
Yeah.
I'm told even the Kalashnikov is a fake, or certainly it is the same weapon in different hands. I'm not interested in this so much as trying to find out what was it that motivated this upper middle class young men who had never shown any interest in Islam or in jihad, who had very promising careers ahead of them, who came from well integrated families, wholesome, well integrated families, should take up. I am foxed. I feel I need more information.
If I can use that as an entry point to shift to the theological dimension, the obvious argument many make is that radicalization among some of these sections who are well-to-do, we've got quite a few questions coming in on Facebook, and people are intrigued by the fact that the catchment is well beyond just the underclass. So is there a connection between ISIS's ability to recruit and the kind of Salafist Islam which is being spread through well-financed mosques and madrasas? How do you see the connection there between the two?
It is important to recall, jihad in the days of the heyday of the Al-Qaeda also recruited people from a wide variety of social backgrounds.
Yeah.
There were a large number
Many of the 9/11 attackers were not
9/11
underclass.
attackers were upper middle class.
Exactly.
Trained as pilots in any other country in the world. A pilot, a commercial pilot, is at the apex of the social ladder. Therefore, the literature is not there. The study, the psychology of the terrorist and of the suicide bomber is not yet developed. We are struggling. Every episode that takes place is one more anecdote helping us to study better, understand better. So there is a connection with the underclass in the case of Western Europe, but not so in the United Kingdom or in the Arab world or in South Asia. Many of the Indians whose names have come up from time to time indicated a background that was at least middle class, if not better. So there is something in the message that appeals to some people with sufficient strength and robustness to encourage them to take up arms. I think, of course, the general message is one of victimhood. That you are victim, you have been victimized, that you have been badly treated, that you have not been given justice. As you know, the recurring theme is injustice. It's not that the world is not an ideal place, nobody expects that. But if real harm has been done to an individual or a group and is attested as such, justice should prevail. Appeals to victimhood are based on this, that this has happened and this has happened and this has happened and you were not given justice. Even then, the overwhelming majority of the Indians and Bangladeshi communities do not respond with violence. They feel, yes, even if injustice has not been given, there are constitutional ways in which we can agitate our case. And hardly any one of us goes into jihad in the numbers that would be warranted given the size of our communities in Bangladesh and in India. Pakistan is a very different scenario because there jihad was introduced as state policy. Right, all those years ago in 1980, when Ziaul Haq became the president, he made Islam a radical Islam. Now you are asking about Salafiyya. I want to clarify to you as follows. That jihad functions at two completely different levels. The doctrinal level, as far as the top leadership is concerned, they are Salafi. They are nurtured in the texts of jihad, of Sayyid Qutb and Maududi and Abdul Salam Faraj, Shukri Mustafa, etc., Abdullah Azam. There is a body of literature readily available. Some of us would believe that it's a serious distortion of the original text, but be that as it may, there is a body of literature available for the educated, doctrinally oriented jihadi at the apex. The rank and file of jihad have absolutely nothing to do with any literature. They are incapable of reading these texts. They appeal to them is not even religious. The appeal to them is about comradeship, about being part of something greater than yourself. It's very, very interesting the kind of social media appeals that are made to these young men in different parts of Europe. They have very little to do with Islam. They take into account the fact that you are culturally or economically or educationally disoriented. You feel that you are marginal in your society, your adopted society. You don't fit in either in your traditional authentic culture or in the adopted culture where your parents have brought you. Very often parents are so busy making a living and nurturing a home that they are not able to give these young people all the solace and comfort that family life should give them. So many of these people are open to blandishments that here is something bigger than you. The first appeal is to comradeship. A lonely, isolated, frequently abused individual is very often seduced by this allure of comradeship. Right. The second is to be part of something which is historical, which is part of something extraordinary, something bigger than. Can you imagine this? Whom the Americans, quote unquote, would call a loser, suddenly is told that you are not a loser. You have been mistreated. You have not been given justice. But here you are part of an enterprise that is bigger than yourself, and your name will be sung and celebrated for years and decades to come. So the twin appeals of comradeship and of being part of a great historical enterprise, there is very little about Islam. In the case of Pakistan and India, I am told that the social media tend to focus on Muslim glory and contrast it with their shameful lives today.
So you mean the ISIS messaging for
ISIS
Muslims
messages
in
onto South Asia, particularly to India, because they are alarmed that while the Pakistanis have been seduced into jihad over a 30 years or 40-year period, the Indian Muslim refuses to budge. And this is a huge catchment area. And the reason is, we are again struggling to understand that, as you know, the Indian Muslim rejected Al Qaeda in toto. That even when 100,000 jihadis went across to the Pak Afghan border from 82 to 92, not a single Indian Muslim went. So and this is not because they were not provoked. Do recall the period of the 80s and 90s is the period of
Great
the
communal tension.
Babari movement, the mobilization on the basis of Hindutva, the Hashempura riots, the Rath Yatra, then you had the communal riots in Bombay and the large-scale killings of Muslims at that time, not one of which has ever been satisfactorily addressed by the Indian state. And then, of course, you had the jihad in Kashmir. The Indian Muslim refused to budge. Even today, though there are some sections which are alarmed that even 1 or 2 or 10 or 15 have gone, I tend to be much more comforted by the fact that only a handful have been seduced. Do recall here that from Europe 10 to 15,000 have gone, including 5,000 women. Do recall that more than 20,000 GCC nationals have gone. Of course, the base is from Iraq and Syria, but what about those huge numbers of Central Asians who have shown up and Southeast Asian? So I am still comforted by all the things that have gone wrong in our political order and in our social order at home. I am still delighted to see that jihad has very little resonance, that the Indian Muslim believes and will continue to believe that his salvation lies in a strong secular democratic order at home. There is no other salvation for him. There is no salvation for him in jihad or in any kind of a Muslim order. It is only in a secular order.
We've got a couple of questions that have come to us via Facebook. Satyavrat Mishra asks, is ISIS a greater threat than it is being presented as? And Mohsin Atiq Khan asks, who created ISIS? Why are the great powers taking that much of time to finish it off?
Well, who created ISIS? ISIS originates entirely in the US assault upon Iraq. There was no ISIS before that. In reaction to Shia empowerment, there was a mobilization of Shia forces. It is said in the early stages that some sections of the GCC community funded the jihad led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi generated a very lethal form of jihad in Iraq. He affiliated himself to Al-Qaeda and was the head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And later on he was killed in 2006. But the institution that he had put together continued to be resilient. It survived, this institution survived the Sunni uprising against jihad in Iraq between 2007 and 2009. So in retrospect, if you want to look at the paternity of the Islamic State, you have to point your finger first at the American invasion, not just at the invasion and the regime change, a deliberate decision to structure the political order in Iraq on sectarian basis. It need not have been so. It was not inevitable. Right. And many of us now tend to believe that it was a deliberate policy of divide and rule, to let these Iraqis fight each other till the last Iraqi. It was seen foolishly by the neoconservatives in Washington that this was the way in which you could ensure the security.
They never imagined Iraq could be a
These are unintended consequences. They never thought they would lose the war.
Yeah.
It is the jihadis who defeated them. It was the jihadis who defeated them. They killed 500,000 people, the Americans, destroyed all the major cities, destroyed all the institutions, but the Iraqi never gave up. His protest was against the sectarianization of his country. That was the most important point to be noted. This is the origin. Why can it not be? It cannot be eradicated. Jihad is not.
That's a
an
frightening thing
institu-
you're saying.
Jihad is not an institution. It is not a structure. It is a mindset. It is a mindset. It is a belief that you are participating in something larger than yourself, that you have enemies around you who wish you ill, who are destructive of your culture, destructive of your faith, and therefore you have to take arms against them. And in this war, there are no innocents. By the way, let me also point out to you that we focus so much on the violence of the Islamic State. Just shift your gaze onto the other side and view it from there. Since the United States has intervened in West Asia over the last few years, I'm not even going back to the global jihad, just to the Afghan struggle onward from 2001 onwards after 9/11, 20 to 30,000 Afghans were killed in carpet bombing. 500,000 Iraqis have been killed as a result of the war for no rhyme or reason that anybody can figure out. Several thousand Libyans were killed in carpet bombing over Tripoli. The Israelis have carried out extraordinary violence against the Arabs in Palestine and in Lebanon with total immunity. See some of the origins of Arab anger and Muslim anger in these episodes, which are not highlighted at all and which are dismissed. But in the Western media and in the Western consciousness, but they are indeed an extremely powerful lived experience for the people of West Asia. Unless we look at that gaze, look at the drone attacks. Now, okay, you killed one jihadi and you think that you have got away with it. The analysis of jihad of Ayman Zawahiri, that in this war there are no innocents, is exactly matched by the thinking in Washington, that in this war there are no innocents, and therefore I have immunity and impunity with regard to the violence I can inflict on my enemy. They are two mirror images of each other.
Right. But are there still connections between states in the region and ISIS?
Absolutely.
Are there?
Please do recall, Siddharth, that jihad flourishes under state support, state sponsorship.
So what's the calculation of Qatar or Saudi Arabia or any
No,
of
let me
Turkey?
tell you now. This is much more complicated and nuanced, and it would be wrong of me to point fingers at specific countries. The global jihad in Afghanistan was state sponsored, put together by United States, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. After the success of the global jihad, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia took over the sponsorship of the Taliban state with full support of the Americans. After the 9/11 bombings, Pakistan became the guardian of Al Qaeda and Taliban, and it continues to be so to this day, not only of these two organizations, but a host of domestic entities as well. With regard to the Islamic State, do recall here that Turkey permitted a large number of jihadis to cross its border into Syria. Many of them joined Jabhat Nusra, the Al Qaeda affiliate, and many others joined the Islamic State. There was a jihadi superhighway that was constructed. The countries that intervened in Syria put together a large number of Salafi militia, which robustly cooperated with the jihadi groups in Syria, so much so that it is difficult to tell one from the other. How can you tell on the battlefields of Syria that one is Salafi and the other is jihadi, particularly when there is so much operational cooperation between them? So my concern is, as of now, today, for a very long time, the Islamic State did not need state sponsorship. Well, it had a state, it had revenues, it had an army, it had a bureaucracy, and a judiciary. It provided municipal services, it ran schools, it gave salaries, it provided marriage guidance to young people. Yes, they are today, therefore became a proto-state. It is possible that under military action that proto-state may not exist, just as the Emirate of Afghanistan ceased to exist. But my current question to you would be, after 35 years, has Al Qaeda ceased to exist? With all the weaponry that we have used against them, Al Qaeda is today as robust as it was after the bombings of 2000, just before the bombings of 2001. At the time of 9/11, it now controls 2/3 of Afghanistan. Large parts of Pakistan are under jihadi control. Almost the entire state of Somalia is under jihadi control. Large parts of Nigeria and Mali and southern Algeria are under jihadi control. Does this seem to you like people who are losing the war?
Pockets in Libya.
In fact, large portions of Libya. Look at these reasons. When you destroy state order through external intervention or internal civil conflict, you open the doors for jihad. Whenever you do not provide governance to people, that opens the doors for jihad, just as Mali and Boko Haram have flourished in the north of Nigeria and in the north of Mali. So governance on the one hand and breakdown of state order in the other are the reasons why people penetrate and establish themselves. This is how regional affiliates come into being. The lone wolf is a narrative of its own, and we have discussed it already. But the decentralization is also a very dangerous thing for us. I am looking at a scenario, Siddharth, where you could have a situation where Al-Qaeda, where Islamic State's top leadership may merely provide you with inspiration through social media. And you will have a variety of decentralized entities that would carry out operations on their own. And they would be individual lone wolf warriors who would carry out individual actions. There could be occasional cooperation between them. Already we have seen that there is operational coordination between Al-Shabaab of Somalia and Boko Haram of Nigeria. Boko Haram has become a robust entity because of the training it got from the Al-Shabaab. Can you imagine a scenario in the near future when many of these regional entities would be inspired by the Khalifa far away somewhere and carry out their own operations and coordinate from time to time with the bigger operations? This has happened before. I cannot rule it out today.
So final thought before we end this discussion is that it's a pretty grim scenario you're painting.
Sorry?
It's a pretty grim scenario that you're painting. What then is the options available for security agencies, states, law enforcement to deal with this kind of threat? There is obviously
See, I want
the
to
macro
point
picture,
out to
but
you, if you take a historic view, terrorist elements have been with us for the last, as the modern state has emerged over the last 130, 140 years. The basis may change. You will recall in the 19th century you had the anarchists who perpetrated extraordinary violence all across Western Europe and the United States. And they killed a large number of heads of state, heads of government. People were terrified of them. And they were seen as a scourge of their times. Then, of course, on the eve of the First World War, you had nationalism-based terrorists. After that, you had left-wing-based terrorists in different parts of the world, in Latin America and in Europe.
Germany too.
In the case of South Asia, you had a nationalist, ultra-nationalistic Tamil Tigers, and you had a response from the Buddhists, which was also extremely violent. Islam-based terror originates with the global jihad of Afghanistan. It's just about 35 years old. There's a long line of terrorism-related violence. It will wither away at some stage. But some of the things that had happened in West Asia, political things, I would put the most terrible aspect of the political order in West Asia is Western intervention. Consistent Western intervention to manipulate the politics of West Asia and to ensure that large parts of this region remain extremely backward and do not experience the modern democratic and popular participation political systems that the rest of the world has acquired. That is the most important aspect is Western intervention and the overt support of the West for tyrannies in West Asia.
Right.
Absence of political participation, absence of reform. If I have to see, I am speaking with some caution, if I can see the silver lining in this whole scenario, it is India. The only explanation why the Indian Muslim, though he is 180 million strong and the second or third largest Muslim community in the world, why does he not get seduced by jihad? Because in his experience,
Politics
the
is
Indian
lost.
state order has consistently given him certain remedies for his predicament. Firstly, we are committed constitutionally and legally to a secular democratic system which already has extraordinary capacity for self-correction. I would say to you that only in an obnoxious scenario where marginalization, dispossession, disenfranchisement and abuse become the central aspects of the Indian political order, which I do not believe will happen, because the self-correction mechanisms will come into play well before that. I do not believe that the Indian state at least has to fear the scourge of jihad.
Right. And to the extent to which politics in India provides that safety valve for
Absolutely.
people
The Constitution of
people,
India,
people to address their
the Constitution
their
of
concerns.
India,
Right.
the Supreme
Right.
Court,
Right.
the media,
Right.
whatever you may say and do, these institutions, sometimes assaulted, sometimes abused, sometimes undermined, but they hold their own. At the end of the day, it comes as a shock to the ruling party that they have been defeated by people whom they had never taken into account. The Indian Muslim is an integral part of the national political order and it should be seen as such. It should never be seen as the other, the excluded other.
On that note, we will have to end this fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for joining us for our chat today.